I'm going to be doing another video for my Camaro here today. It's a 67 Camaro. This is the interior shell of the 67 Camaro stock console, and this is an auto, I think it's auto meter, auto gauge, one of the two. It's one of the 4 gauge pods that you can buy, and it's actually specifically for a 68 69 Camaro. I've heard lots of people say that these could be adapted or you can go get other things, but really there's very little reference, if any, on how to actually make this piece fit. As you can see, it's clearly, sort of a rectangular shape. It's actually a bit wider at the front end than it is at the back end, which probably fits perfectly for the 68 69 Camaro. It's even got fancy little nut holes or bolt holes here for specifically to mount it in those consoles. Unfortunately, there is no pod specifically available for the 67 Camaro, so I decided to take the one that was available for the later years and try to put it on this one. Obviously this is going to involve some pretty significant modification to the front of the console. I'm going to warn you in advance, for those light-hearted or weak-stomached, this is an original 67 Camaro console. I don't want to get flamed too badly for putting this console through a modification when it's an original and it's not a reproduction. That being said, it is in rough shape. It looks, from back here, oh wow, it looks great, but it's really not. As you can see, it's busted really good in here. There's cracks in here, which I've repaired, and there's a major crack in here. This was just shattered really badly. And as you can tell, there's the original plastic, and here's a coating that was put on it. Some of that I've done, some of it was already done when I got it. Looks like there was a melted spot from an ash, someone put a cigarette down on it there or something. I received it and it was red when I got it. But there was already some textured paints put on it. I've gone through a lot of trouble, more damage in here, to try to get this thing to look decent. And when the chrome's put back on, and the doors, the lids put back on, and I've got a pretty nice looking original shifter plate and everything in the original shifter, it looks pretty decent. The lid that goes over this is decent, and the ashtray and whatnot. So I've got it all, and it looks decent when it's put together, but as it is right now, this is the shabbiest part. So I really want to take this shabby shell and spruce it up a little bit. I'm not going to stop with just this. I am going to touch this up and try to clean this up the best I can, and polish up the chrome and whatnot, and I'll do a sort of follow-up with it done. But I would like to just go through the process of putting this in for now. So let's go with that. So first things first is going to be getting a hole cut in the top of this. Now, it's pretty obvious that this doesn't fit. There's just no way this is going to fit on here. So taking into consideration the dips in the front of these gauges here, I don't want the gauges dipped to get underneath the chrome, and the chrome comes to the shiny bit here. So I can probably have it to about, there-ish. And then if you look back here now, the actual part that comes down is actually beyond the end of the console by half an inch or so. So even once it's down and flush, it's still going to be beyond the end or so. So what I want to do to get this just right is first shave off basically anything on this that's not going to be needed. So more or less I want to shave off some of the front, so right up to the lip here, and I'll just tuck it in a little bit, and then again to the front, and then same with the back. The back I'm going to go very close. I'm going to cut it right in because I really don't want any extra material on this piece that I don't have to have. What I'll probably end up doing is sort of folding over some new material on the back of this and blending it into the back of the console. And really this is by the heater duct anyway. No one sees this, and for my car, being a daily driver, I'm not interested in some kind of an award quality job, but I am particular with how things look. So I do want to make sure that it's at least decent. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this piece down, and then come back and we're going to trace it onto the new, on top of the existing console. Okay, so what I've done is I've just gone and done some relatively rough looking cuts for the moment, just slicing off the front and the back of this. So I basically took those mounting points off front and back of this, so you're left with kind of a rough looking design. But I'm gonna smooth out this and remove this middle section as well. But really all I really want to do is get the the console cut to size. That's really what's going to determine whether this is going to work, and if it's not going to work, I'm going to end up with a big hole. Either way, what I've done is I've marked, as you can see here, very finely marked the center point. There's a little notch right there. I'm going to try to focus in on that. Yeah, a little notch right there, and there's another notch at the back. Same idea, the microscopic notch. Yeah, you can kind of see it there. And then I've marked a notch here, my nail is, and there as the middle points of this whole face, and then of course the middle points of this, and that's how I got a rough idea of the alignment. Well, not really rough, I'd say it's pretty precise. However, then coming back here and lining it up and looking at it, I'm like, looks a bit funny. And then I noticed that the actual spacing for the openings isn't, of course, centered to the actual piece. Like this opening is pointing more this way and this one this way. So it's actually, this hole is quite a bit closer to this edge. So this one is to this edge, as you can see. The difference is quite significant. So I had to kind of, I used some more measurements, but then kind of in the end sort of just eyeballed it. It's still not going to be crooked or anything, but I just had decided that the way with the measuring tape just wasn't going to work based on the idea that these are angled, and there's 4 of them, and there's quite a bit of gap here and on the other side. So pretty tricky to get it just where you want it, but I did since then. I basically took an X-Acto knife and I just used a long blade and just went alongside it on both sides and got a nice line. I actually purposefully brought it in when I did the second side, so that if anything, it's going to be narrower. I'd rather the hole on my first cut be not wide enough rather than too wide, so that I don't have a situation where I got this gaping amount of space on the one side. I mean, I could fix it. I can do whatever I need to do to fix the plastic, but I just, less work the better. Just in case I didn't mention it earlier, I'm using an old Dremel drill. It's a Dremel Multi-Pro 395. I think I'm probably going up to 25,000 RPM with a diamond wheel on it. Not necessary to use a diamond wheel by any means, but it does a very smooth cut, and if anything, almost melts its way through, as you can see by some of the pieces here. So just be cautious when you start out, that you're going slow enough that you're not melting the thing, but then fast enough that you're not jumping or anything like that. So yeah, so far just X-Acto knife, Dremel drill, just regular measuring tape, and I do have this sanding wheel as well for when I want to clean it up a bit towards the end. So I'm just going to go ahead and slice these 2 lines now, holding my breath the whole time, hoping that I don't screw this up. Okay, so you can see here we've got a little bit better idea of what we're going to look like. It's still very rough, and I made some rookie mistakes here with the Dremel. I got a little bit too much of an angle, too close, trying to trim through and burr down a little bit of my plastic black finish there, and a little bit here. In the grand scheme, these are absolutely nothing in comparison to the repair to head to make this now fit. Essentially now I'm going to clean this up. I want to get it so that this sort of just fits inside the hole, and you can see here overall it's a decent cut minus the 2 little issues there. Pretty straight considering I freehanded it with a wheel. It's still got a ways to go. I mean, it fits relatively flush now. I've got to trim the actual mold here a little bit more in the front, and then of course the back here is, like I said before, you can see quite clearly it's hanging off the edge by a solid 1/2 inch, if not even maybe a little bit more. Either way, maybe even 5/8 of an inch, but that's fine. The gauges don't actually go flush with the back anyway, so what's going to end up happening is there's a chrome piece that comes to along this area here. I'm going to have that go back on, obviously, and I'm going to bring this down with some kind of mold over to this area. So I'll probably end up cutting out a portion of this here and then this here, just so that the gauges fit in there properly. But I'm not going to bother with that yet until I've got the rest of this fitting in pretty nice and snug up in the front and the sides, and then I'll adjust the back as needed, since it's not as important to me as how the front looks. So I'm just going to sort of clean this up a bit now and get this to fit, and we'll come right back. Okay, so I've gone and trimmed this all up. Now you can see it fits in the hole. Now I haven't actually fastened it, of course. I've just cut it here and there ever so finely that it just wants to sit just like that. So it is sitting on the back here, right against the edge, just kind of how I planned it out, which works funny on how sometimes things work out. I've got a little bit of adjustment to me. You can see it doesn't quite line up perfectly with that, and here was I don't know, not my best measurements, I guess. Doesn't really matter. This, if anything, might actually provide some stability here, being that I can rest it on this piece here. There actually are some natural support underneath the original plastic here. You can probably see them on this. Yeah, you can see how these lines went through there. So those little rails that are underneath there actually continue underneath there, and I did my best to not hack them off. Like, I'll just pull it off. You can see here, there's actually some lips that stick out, and those lips actually help hold this on there too. So in the end, that'll be excellent for support. I'm going to be plastic welding the thing like crazy anyway, so it doesn't really matter, but it's nice to have some natural existing support. And then I left a little bit of a lip on here just so that I have some of the original material up front, just that much more stability. In the end, I'm pretty confident this is going to look really good. I'm already very happy. This is going to be the hard part, and I think it's done really well. We'll be following up here with finishing the chutes here without really pushing this in. I can sort of press it and get it to sort of squeeze into place just enough that it sits pretty nice there. It's not quite right, but either way, you can see I've still got these flaps in here. The gauges are going to knock against those if I don't clear them out. I've got to clear them out at least to the bottom of this chrome area here. So it would be nice, obviously, if I didn't have to chip cut this away, but I'm going to have to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut kind of sort of mostly rectangular here, but kind of like that, just so that I can clear some room for the gauges in there. So from this far away, you can't even tell that the console ever didn't have a gauge pod. However, once you get a little bit closer, you can see it's still just hacked up. Clearly, the this has been chewed apart now. It actually turned out pretty good. I left a space in the middle. Maybe not a good idea. I think it's a bit weak, but at the same time, I think if I reinforce it and I connect it to the underside of the pod here, it actually could provide some much needed stability. But at the same time, it should also provide me with a space so I can mold over the thing here. I just didn't want to do any more to this without actually getting a gauge or two in there just to see how far down they actually go. I'm pretty confident that they're going to clear that. They're just the 52mm gauges, so it's not a big deal. This here I can fix up, and same with that, and other than that, it's actually fit pretty good. The gap on the edge is a little bit here and there, and it looks a little bit rough, but I'm going to fill it all in. And the challenge, of course, is going to be making this texture. Realistically, it's probably going to be more like like this texture here. Won't be quite as peely, orange peely as it is. It'll be more like this, which, I mean, being it's under the dash and it's in front of the console and it's in such rough shape, it's actually, it's not bad. I nicked it again there, but same idea. Minor detail in the grand scheme here. So I'm going to bring it inside and I'm going to tack it up, and I'm going to start the attaching process here. It's really the tricky part now is going to be making sure that this stays flush, because the plastics are different thicknesses, so it's going to have to be flush to the surface when I actually start welding it, so that it doesn't overlap. And this thing actually has a natural bend in it, and it wants to pop up at the front, as you can see here. I can kind of wiggle that. So I have to kind of make sure that I'll tack it in the corners, and I'll have to hold it and tack it in the middle so that it doesn't pop up on me. But otherwise, it's as far as appearance goes, it's nice to have a console with a gauge pod in it. Okay, so we brought this project inside. I've got the pod here on the floor, the whole console on the floor. It's upside down, just so I could attach it. So what I've done is I've handyman plastic welded this together. So I managed to just sort of put the whole thing on the floor on a nice soft surface. I cleaned it up and just held it sort of flush on the other side like this, and then you throw it my I got a cheesy pointed welder here, melting a hole and everything. Cheesy pointed welder, and let's set my place on fire. 1 second. And it's basically just folded. I made a funnel or a tunnel along the edge, tacked it, of course, and then sort of smeared and folded the two plastics together. You can kind of take a better look here if you want. There's a million YouTube videos on how to plastic weld with a soldering iron. So you can kind of just see how I did that there. It looks very similar to how those get done. It's not very clean. It's not great. And honestly, this is not done. I've got another step I'm going to take to even further secure this. But flipping it over, you can see that even though it looks very similar to how it wasn't welded, there's no actual gaps now. Like so, even though there's a sort of a ditch, if you will, a crevice all the way along, there's no actual way that water or epoxy or whatever it is can actually get through there. Of course, through the back. And I sort of just temporarily tack these together for now here because that's where I want it to become flush. So that it's sort of one with the console there, and then I'm going to create some kind of a fold over. A couple things I want to mention at this point is the gauges. They, as you can see here, the space between here and here is pretty small. There's no way I can really go any further unless I want to start interfering with the chrome piece that goes there. So the issue is that you need to make sure you have a gauge, or two gauges in this case, that can actually fit in that gap. Luckily, I have an electric gauge for like a voltmeter that's quite narrow, or quite doesn't have much depth, and then I've got an air fuel mixture gauge that's it's electronic as well. So electronic gauges, seem to fit in there. They're going to be tight as well, but they do fit. Whereas maybe like a boost gauge or an oil pressure where you might have hoses and things like that, it could be an issue. If you have electric, it's fine, but something to keep in mind. In theory, I could have bumped this thing up a little bit, but since I knew my gauges fit before I started tacking it all together, it's fine. I like the smooth look, and I think, and it's all smoothed out and painted the same. I think it'll look pretty good. Something else I'll mention again is before you even get into any of this, it wouldn't be a horrible idea unless you're really experienced to actually start with sort of a sample piece. So I took a piece of the mold, the original gauge pod mold, that I cut off outside, and then a piece of the console, the original console, just that I cut off, and I just sort of plastic whittled them together. You can kind of get an idea. It's sort of the same looking as it was underneath. I did both sides just sort of for giggles, and it's very, very strong as it is even right now. Like I can flex that quite a bit, just as much probably as I could have flexed the original. I did this more than anything for compatibility test, making sure that the plastics were going to actually melt together properly. I'm not an expert at this. I wouldn't know by looking at them if they're polyurethane or polyapolene or polylipidapidor. So I just tried them to make sure, and they worked fine. So I'm going to go do my next step, and we'll go from there. So step 2 of securing the base would be to add some stainless steel mesh to the crevice. As you can see here, I got a piece here. It looks kind of ugly, almost like a snakeskin actually from here, but all I've really done is cut out some pieces of stainless steel mesh, place them over the area that I want to fasten, and just basically soldered through it. I'm actually using I got a different soldering iron, and I'm using a flat tip on it. It sort of allows you to sort of press and slide at the same time. It covers a bit more space a little quicker, but it gives you this really ugly looking mess. But the reality is that now this mesh has actually been sunken into the plastic a little bit. This side's still a bit warm, and it allows you just to gain massive strength in that area. Realistically, as long as the mesh is good and that I did a good enough job sinking it, it actually should be stronger than as if it was just regular plastic. And really, that's what I want. I don't want any chance that this is going to ever fail. Since I'm going to be painting and epoxying the top of it, I really don't want there to be any flecks or the cracks to open or anything like that. So I want to make sure that once I'm done with this and it's dry, that it's super dry. So I'm going to do another piece here, and one there, and one there, and then I've got a tiny little piece that I'm going to do just in this area here to kind of re-secure, or to secure this piece to that piece there. And then I'm gonna get you caught up here. So I've sunken all the mesh all the way around. It doesn't look like I've gone all the way in because of how shiny it is, but all the little holes in the mesh have had plastic seep up. I did a special attention on the back piece and the front piece here, made them a little bit deeper just so that that would be stronger. But for the most part, it's pretty well sunk in there. You don't want to go too far or too hard because you will push on it too much and you could cause it to warp the face, and we really don't want that, especially with the thickness of this plastic. So I've gone ahead and completed all that. It's been a day now. I've waited, I've had other things to do, so it's all dry. It's ridiculously strong. And just for interest sake, the mesh I was using is actually from an oil spill, like a saucepan spill shield, whatever. It's in a ring. I think I bought it from Home Hardware or whatever for a couple bucks. Totally worthwhile. Make sure you get one with stainless steel. They do make some with like a plastic, and that's obviously not going to work. This here is the plastic that I used. It's a plastic binder. It's the same gauge plastic as the actual gauge pod, and it's quite flexible, and you can cut it, of course. And you can see here what I've done. Put over if I can. And I've gone and sanded this all. You can see here I did have a bit of a raised portion. I think when I started I was pressing too hard, and then I kind of settled down a little bit. And when I sanded it, it smoothed out pretty nice. Probably have a little bit more sanding to do, well, obviously, at some point, but I've got some filler to put in this crevice anyway. So with this plastic that I mentioned, I've made myself a mold for the back. It doesn't look super pretty at all right now, but you can see that that piece of rectangular plastic here and another one here, and then I just sort of trimmed and trimmed and trimmed until it fit in the crevice that I made, and then I joined it to this middle portion. So the general idea is that I had smooth, and then it goes around the base, and then it reconnects with that middle post, and then smooth again around. I didn't need it to look super pretty at this point. I'm going to sand this probably mostly by hand just to get all the roughness away and make it generally smooth. And then when I do the epoxy filler on this crevice here, I'm going to do some into here and probably some in here just to smooth it out a little bit as like a filler. And then I'll sand it all again, and then it should be ready for paint at that point. Overall, I'm very happy with it. Despite this, I mean, I'm hand crafting this, so I don't expect it to look beautiful, especially not right away. And keeping in mind that if someone were to try to copy me, this is actually open at the base here. You could probably, if you had your finger small enough, you could stick something through there if you really tried to. I'll try to show you here. Yeah, you can see here, this is actually just open. And I'm fine with that. If anything, you could say it's for aerodynamics or airflow, or I suppose you could put a wire up and through there if you really wanted to. I don't know why you would, but you could. Either way, I'll continue here. So I've got an epoxy the seams. I took a clear paste on epoxy and just went around the seam of this here. It's transparent. It's kind of almost a rubbery texture, but it is sandable. So it's been dry for a month or so since I've put this project aside. I had to go and pull the engine on the Camaro in order to do some of the work that's going to get done. So this kind of got the back burner, but I want to get this done today if I can. So I'm going to sand this down flush. I'll do it by hand, and I noticed there's a bit of low spot, a dip in the plastic here, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can see here I did the same thing to the back. It looks kind of crappy right now just because of the difference in color and all this other stuff, but you get the general idea here. It's quite smooth now. I mean, it's still rough because of the fact that it needs to be sanded, but you get an idea. It's a smooth transition here all the way along, so that should provide pretty decent. It's still going to have the holes. I don't know if you can see that there, the holes underneath. But because of the fact it's mounted under the dash, I don't really care. Yeah, so you can see the holes there. It's kind of sheltered from the angle that you're going to see it from the driver point of view, which will be, something like that. You're never going to notice that with the gauges in there. I think overall, as long as I can get the seam gone, and with it painted, it looked pretty good. Back inside and got it all sanded down. So I've actually decided to do this piece as well. There were some raised spots. I think someone burned it with a cigarette or something. I don't even know. But decided to do that, and then also managed to get this all sanded up. Now, it looks obviously kind of ugly. I actually sanded down further than I probably needed to in some spots, but it's very flush all the way around. There's a couple of imperfections. There's one little here, and there's something right in that area. I think the textured paint I'm using is going to hide it. So I'm not going to sit here for another 2 hours and try to get this thing just right, only to find that I wasted my time. So I've sanded it all down. It's nice and smooth. I've actually already cleaned it. It doesn't look pretty, but that's a difference in the plastic, so it just doesn't look the same. Plus, I didn't spend quite as much time on the back of it as I did, obviously, on the face. I wanted to make sure that driver and passenger view on this thing is going to look pretty good. So I've got it in the house. It's warm. It's actually, there's snow on the ground outside, so I've got a heater and a little shed, and I'm going to paint it in there. So I will get started on that, and you'll see the finished result. Here it is, the 67 Camaro custom 4-gauge pod, taken from the Autometer 4-gauge pod for the 68 and 69 Camaro. Obviously it's been heavily adapted here. This is the finished product. As you can see, it looks pretty good. Couple of minor defects overall, mostly on the back side here where you can't see it anyway, but it does look pretty good, I think. I just added 1 gauge here just so you can get a rough idea what it looks like with a gauge in it. And yeah, here's the full console. Excuse the condition of the console. As I mentioned earlier, the edges of it and whatnot have some work to be done, some more painting. As you can see here, this is the factory finish on the console. It's got like a snakeskin, orange peely kind of thing, and then this is the new one. It's painted with a Rust-Oleum truck bed liner paint. It's actually just starting to rain, so if you see any weird imperfections, that's probably what it is. Other than that, it looks decent, I think. Maybe as an observation, if you didn't want 4 gauges, you would be better off with a 3-gauge pod to adapt, because you would be less likely to have to deal with this backside business. And just from the dimensions of the panel here, it would actually look probably more stock to have 3-gauge there. I mean, the stock was 3-gauge, so if you could do you know, just find a flat panel that was 3 gauges across, you'd probably end up with something that looks more stock and would still end up being custom. So yeah, feel free to subscribe to this video if you found it interesting, as well as I've rebranded the entire series now to Turbo Camaro. So the YouTube channel reflects that, Google+, and there's a brand new website, turbocamaro.ca. That's turbocamaro.ca. Feel free to check that out for exclusive videos and lots of write-ups and pictures. Thanks.